As we speak, I am dispatching thousands and thousands of heavily armed soldiers.
Here outside the historic St. John's Episcopal Church, we are just about a block away from the White House, and you will recognize it. This is where this all went down just yesterday. Those peaceful protesters facing off against U.S. Park Police, Secret Service police, and then it went south. Those police officers moving in, using tear gas, forcefully moving in on those peaceful protesters to clear the way. Just as this was all happening out here, a remarkable split screen. The president in the Rose Garden addressing the nation for the first time from inside the White House.
I am your president of law and order and an ally of all peaceful protesters. But in recent days, our nation has been gripped by professional anarchists, violent mobs, arsonists, looters, criminals, rioters, Antifa, and others.
And then those police officers clearing the scene, making way for the president to walk across the street here and come to a visit to this church. And that is where the photo op happened. The president holding up a Bible for a full minute and a half, posing for the cameras, calling his aides to come over and pose with him. Controversy right now, remarkable.
The seventh night of protests following the death of George Floyd. In St. Louis, a night of destruction, buildings on fire, 4 police officers shot during a face-off with a late-night crowd trying to storm police headquarters. In Las Vegas, an officer shot in the head overnight right on the Vegas Strip near Circus Circus. Another shot downtown near the federal courthouse. In Buffalo, a terrifying scene after 2 officers were hit by a vehicle at the scene of a protest, leaving at least 1 in serious condition. Officials saying the driver was not deliberately targeting law enforcement. In New York City, thousands marched down the streets in a largely peaceful protest. The highest-ranking uniformed member of the NYPD taking a knee with those gathered in Washington Square Park.
Let New York show the country how this is done.
But looting attempts began later in the night as Governor Cuomo's newly announced 11 p.m. citywide curfew approached. Mayhem breaking out on Fifth Avenue as our Stephanie Ramos reported live.
Things are getting wild here at Rockefeller Center here in New York City. It's bad. We're feeding in live.
And back here in New York City, this is what some businesses look like this morning. Broken windows, shattered glass. But just to be very clear, this is not at all a representation of the daytime peaceful protests that we witnessed across New York City.
What are y'all doing? Y'all doing nothing. Because that's not going to bring my brother back.
The results of 2 autopsies have been released, one performed by an independent doctor hired by the George Floyd family.
The autopsy shows that Mr. Floyd had no underlying medical problem that caused or contributed to his death. He was in good health.
Another by the Hennepin County Medical Examiner. And while there are some differences, both agree that his death was a homicide.
This is the site where George Floyd took his last breaths, and I want you to take a look here. There are a number of people coming here to pay their last respects to George Floyd. You can hear the chanting in the background. One of the people who came here to pay their last respects was George Floyd's younger brother, Terrence. It was an emotional moment for him as he approached this intersection here. His knees buckled. He began to cry. That's when Terrence decided he wanted to address the crowd that had gathered here. He talked to them adamantly, passionately about ending the violence.
Let's do this another way. Let's stop thinking that our voice don't matter. That's right. And vote.
I've been tired. I've cried over this for years. We've been fighting the same battle.
We're seeing a lot of young protesters out here. People from all different backgrounds, all different nationalities, not only to protest the killing of George Floyd, but also to protest the racial inequality in this country.
Our generation will change the world.
From Los Angeles to Atlanta and here in Washington, We are one voice, we are one people.
These are the faces fighting for change. Diverse activists and allies standing together. 23-year-old Ariana Evans says her generation has reached a boiling point.
Nothing has changed. Eric Garner, Sandra Bland. Why? This continual abuse of power is not going to stand with us.
No justice! No peace!
This generation of hundreds of teens and young adults protesting have been rocked by unrest. The images of today's protests mirroring those from the civil rights era. Young Americans then banding together too, pushing for racial equality.
We shall overcome someday.
And now, over 50 years later, that fight continues.
Don't shoot! Don't shoot!
Several consecutive nights of major protests, and sometimes violent, in Denver, Colorado, led to a massive mess around the state capitol building. There was trash everywhere, there was graffiti covering almost every outdoor surface you could see, but by Monday morning, hundreds of volunteers turned out to clean up the mess. We spoke to several of them who said that they were unhappy with the use of graffiti as a form of protest. Several of them said that they were actually inspired by some of the messages that they were themselves cleaning up. In particular, we spoke to the police chief, who we saw wiping away tears at the sight of his residents coming together to clean up this mess. And we saw him speaking to a young man named Neil, who was black and was out protesting the night before. Neil, who's calling for peaceful protests, wants a gesture of unity from the police. And the police chief told us that he committed to marching with the protesters.
If he's got something planned, he'll give me a call and I'll stand shoulder to shoulder with him and march with him.
And that feels like a major step for Colorado. One of the main themes we've been hearing from demonstrators is stand with us, kneel with us, march with us. And it sounds like that's exactly what the police chief intends to do.